Declan McCulloch. Want to raise your hand, Declan? Who, until March, was a senior correspondent for many years with CNET. And Brandon Bailey is a technology reporter for the San Jose Mercury. Take it away, guys.
Well, thanks for inviting us to speak, and thanks to the Internet Society for organizing the event. I've covered surveillance topics as a reporter for over 15 years in Washington, D.C., and then out here in the Bay Area. This is at Wired and Time and CBSNews.com and CNET, but I'm wearing a different hat. I left in March to create a startup that's building a recommendation engine. The first product is an iOS and Android app available in beta this spring, so sign up at recent.io for a news recommendation app. So we're approaching the 1-year mark of Edward Snowden's revelations. I mean, the first article was June 5th of 2013, and that was an article by Glenn Greenwald in The Guardian, talking about Verizon and the NSA vacuuming up American cell phone records. That was the first of many stories to come from these documents. It led to that, and other stories led to Glenn being called a traitor by sitting members of Congress, including the former chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, and also led to The Guardian and the Washington Post sharing the Pulitzer Prize last month. And most folks would date the beginning of the modern surveillance reporting era from that day, June 5th of last year, but I would actually challenge that and remind you of other litigation, advocacy, and reporting that was going on well before last June 5th. We already knew a bit about the NSA's domestic surveillance programs before June 5th of last year. A report in 2006 by USA Today revealed that the NSA was vacuuming up records of all phone calls that Americans make every day. There were a series of articles at the time. They're backed up by quotes from members of Congress. There was talk of a congressional investigation. But then people kind of forgot about this, and then life moved on. We already knew a bit about the NSA's fiber taps as well. Mark Klein, who lives in the Bay Area and worked for AT&T, revealed almost a decade ago, this is 8-9 years ago, that at AT&T he witnessed domestic voice and internet traffic being diverted to the NSA's Secure Room 641A of AT&T's facility. It was just, 45 miles north of here off the 101 at 2nd and Folsom in San Francisco. And that room was available only to NSA-cleared technician, and Mark's sworn statements became public as part of the Electronic Frontier Foundation's lawsuit against AT&T. But then again, people kind of forgot about this, and life moved on. We knew about the NSA's close ties with telecommunications companies. I'm not talking about these companies out here that we know and more or less love. I'm talking about mostly East Coast, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, etc. companies. The Los Angeles Times reported a decade ago that AT&T opened its customer information database to the NSA. James Bamford, who's the preeminent NSA journalist of our era, reported around the same time that the AT&T opened its domestic facilities to NSA fiber taps, not just in San Francisco. My own reporting revealed that Google was fighting secret NSA surveillance demands in federal court before June of last year, and that the government back in 2009 was compiling a list of Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act dockets that it, quote, was unable to fully implement because the 1994 law did not force email providers and social networks to comply. And EFF co-founder John Gilmore would tell anyone who wanted to listen that the Internet Engineering Standards or IETF standards committees were being sabotaged by NSA employees and contractors. NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake would tell anyone who wanted to listen about the NSA's internal problems and deaf ear towards civil liberties. But then people kind of forgot about this and life moved on. But what Edward Snowden's document trove and Glenn's reporting did was it finally prevented people from kind of forgetting about this and moving on. Instead of a series of scattered reports that can maybe be denied or ignored by officials, you actually have these official NSA documents. We know as a result that the agency's giant electronic ear, which was received tens of billions of dollars since 2001 to ostensibly spy on terrorists, was turned inward on us as well in some circumstances. So it's made it a media story, a story the media can no longer just ignore. It's not just anonymous sources or a lone AT&T technician who can be discredited. So now what about the impact on Silicon Valley companies? I mean, the most obvious is that initial PRISM story that was published last June simultaneously by The Guardian and The Washington Post. It contained this incendiary claim that the NSA had direct access to servers operated by Facebook and Google and Apple and so on. And that claim turned out to be false. Both news organizations backtracked. The Post started quietly amending the article on the website without even listing what they were doing, which is not exactly the best way to do these things. And The Guardian's subsequent reporting no longer made that claim. My hunch is that they're both racing to get the story out first, which is why they rushed this into print and only gave the tech companies an hour or two to respond. And now, a series of stories the next day, including one I wrote, tried to set the record straight. Wire's own reporting said that the so-called direct access was companies moving data to a secure FTP site in response to forcible compulsory legal process, which is kind of exactly the opposite of what you think of when you hear direct access, which means like I got the root password, I get to snoop around Google, Facebook, et cetera's data centers. And it turns out that this legal process was an abuse of a 2008 law, called Section 702 of that law, that nobody thought would be used or really misused in this manner. But that headline would be, the feds use a secret reinterpretation of Section 702 to compel companies to do these things, isn't really as sexy as Silicon Valley companies give the feds direct access to all your user data. And so in the NSA, to its discredit, has been happy to have the focus shifting away from it to the left coast here. And so the general counsel has been spreading misinformation as recently as March of this year. But first impressions matter. And so while the later coverage was better, it improved dramatically over the following few months, these first reports set the tone, and the companies out here have been on the defensive ever since. They still haven't done a great job of explaining what exactly is going on, which in reality is far more privacy protective of their users than most people actually know. And two more data points that have influenced the industry since last June. And the first was a disclosure in the Washington Post last September, based on Snowden's documents, that the NSA is tapping the fiber links between companies' data centers, which prompted Google to accelerate plans to encrypt everything. And the second was disclosures around the same time by the Times, the Guardian, and ProPublica, about how the NSA is weakening encryption standards and making design changes to encryption software that makes it easier for them to break. And that's remarkable because it's a government agency that has one of its core mandates protecting Americans' communications. And I think that's left folks out here, the cryptographers and engineers, to reevaluate how these standards processes should work. And one last point on the Internet Society. I mean, this is the IETF is part of the Internet Society. The Internet Society is the IETF's home, and the IETF plays a role in encryption standards, and the Internet Society does important work, and you can support them by becoming a member for $75 a year. All yours.
So I cover internet companies for the business desk at the San Jose Mercury News. Some of my stories do get picked up through syndication and might appear in the LA Times or other places, but they're sort of a friendly competitor of mine. So I've been writing for the last year. The companies that I follow include Google, Facebook, Yahoo, in my spare time, Twitter and LinkedIn. And so I've been following for the last year sort of the fallout from these revelations and the industry's response. And I thought I would talk a little bit more about that, as sort of how things have evolved over the last year. Because I think, as Mike mentioned earlier in the day, these revelations really presented a problem for the internet industry in a couple of ways. I mean, there's certainly this long-standing tradition in Silicon Valley, some might call it a libertarian tradition of concern for individuals' rights and resistance against government intrusion. But there's also a sort of a pre-existing public relations sensitivity to the issue of protecting user data, and there are already concerns and criticism that gets lobbed at these companies about what they do and what they let happen to the data of their users. And so the last thing they needed was this any notion that the government was being allowed to tap directly into their servers or get access in other ways. And the reality is, I think that, as Declan said, there have been hints of this over the years, but the Snowden revelations really made it clear to a much higher level of awareness in the general public that the government has some access both through the front door through legal process and apparently through some backdoor exploits through things like the weakening of encryption standards and tapping into the transmissions between data centers overseas. So anyway, as these things were starting to come out initially, I started hearing people talk last year about a so-called summer of Snowden, when there were these waves of revelations that were just leaving people reeling. And I'm going to elaborate on that just a little bit with a sort of a narrative concept that I call the 4 seasons of Snowden. It's not a perfect theory, but I think it might help just in providing a little more context. The first thing that I noticed last summer was that after the initial reporting, which did turn out to be not accurate about directly tapping in to the company's servers, you heard some immediate denials from the major internet companies, but not a lot of further statement. I think they were sort of shocked in trying to figure out what is it that they were being confronted with. But it did come out a few weeks later, as Declan had reported before, that Google had fought some quiet legal battles. I think the New York Times reported that the Yahoo had also waged an unsuccessful and secret legal battle in the FISA court to resist some of these orders. And when they lost in 2008, they weren't allowed to tell anybody about it, but people that I talked to said that gave the government a pretty powerful club to hold over the heads of other companies and that were questioning whether they had to comply with some of the legal demands for information. But most of this was very kind of low-key through the summer, and we didn't hear a lot from the companies about this. By last fall, you started to get more of a sense of a public response from the tech industry, and some of that coincided with the reporting on these efforts by the US and the Brits to weaken encryption standards. You had the tech companies in September filing legal papers that essentially amounted to lawsuits asking the Department of Justice for the authority to expand what they could say about legal requests for data through these transparency reports that the companies put out. And I think that most people that I talk to agree that those transparency reports are valuable because they allow you to some extent monitor and track the trends in what the government's asking for and how much the government is asking for. But I think there's also, and I know that the companies argued in their court papers that they really wanted to be able to put out more details in their reports because they wanted to be able to tell the public, look, these requests only involve a fairly small portion of our users. This is not a widespread thing the way it's been portrayed. And so there was a little bit of a public relations aspect to that as well. Also last fall, you had Mark Zuckerberg appearing at a TechCrunch conference in San Francisco where he became kind of the most outspoken of the major CEOs on this topic when he said that the government blew it on this. But what he was really saying in the rest of his remarks was that in part what he was saying is that he said the government blew it when the government tried to reassure the public by saying, well, we're only requesting data or gathering data on mostly foreign nationals. This doesn't affect US citizens. And Zuckerberg's concern was, as he articulated at the conference, is, hey, that's not a big help to companies who derive at least half their multi-billion dollars in sales from foreign customers. This is not helping them keep the trust of those companies. You did start to have last fall some indications, like the Washington Post reported that that Google was stepping up encryption of transmissions between its data center links. And by winter, my sense is that we began to see a lot more indication of the industry really responding in a technological way. You had the report in the Post that the NSA was tapping the data center links or getting access to data transmissions between the centers operated by Google and Yahoo. And I think this really touched a nerve. You had the general counsel of Google writing a blog post that just expressed, used the word outrage. You had a couple of Google engineers, a fellow named Brandon Downey, who kind of famously posted on his social media Google Plus account a big FU to the NSA. And a week later, one of his colleagues posted similarly. And their arguments were that they had devoted their careers to protecting their systems against unauthorized hacking and access to their users' information, and to find out that their own government was apparently attempting to crack into that just left them outraged. In fact, one of them used a Lord of the Rings comparison to going off and defeating the evil Lord Sauron, I think, and coming back and finding that the trees had been cut down in the Shire. And if you don't know the Lord of the Rings, I think you can just know that anytime you have software engineers invoking the Lord of the Rings, that means they're pretty serious. They're pretty and by December, I was able to, I reported a story that a lot of other people were reporting too, which is that not just Google, but most of the major internet companies had realized that they needed to adopt a technological response, and they needed to encrypt data center transmissions. They needed to, you had Yahoo for the first time talking about encrypting user communications. You had companies talking about, more widely talking about adopting perfect forward secrecy and more enhanced encryption. And to some extent, these things had been going on already. Google and Facebook said, well, we had started on this before, but they also acknowledged that they accelerated these efforts as a result of some of this reporting that came out. And I think it became clear to me at that point that the companies realized this isn't just a policy issue to try to work within the legal system, and it isn't just a public relations issue to try to deal with, but that this is a technological issue that they needed to address in the same way that they would address threats from some other sector, like some Eastern European criminal syndicate or what have you. Just finally, by spring, I think we had a series of events that just showed kind of how complicated the relationship between the tech industry and the United States government is. On the same day, at one point early in the spring, the Department of Justice announced that they had reached an agreement with the companies that would allow them to make more wide disclosure of the national security information requests in their transparency reports. On that same day, The Guardian and The Times both reported that US and British agencies had been siphoning off user information from various mobile apps that proved to be relatively leaky. And so it was clear that settlement, the legal settlement, as far as the transparency reports, did not resolve this issue and did not mean that this was all happily going to go away. In March, Edward Snowden spoke by video link to the South by Southwest conference, an audience with a lot of people from the tech industry there, and he had got a lot of applause when he said that accused the government of setting fire to the future of the internet, and he urged companies to work and people in the tech industry to work more on technological defenses and encryption, and said, you guys are the firefighters. And also in March, Glenn Greenwald reported again that the NSA had apparently used something like a man-in-the-middle process to simulate the effect of a Facebook server in order to inject some malware onto the computers of some specific individual targets. Now, there was not an indication that this was a widespread tactic, but it was enough to get Mark Zuckerberg angry enough to post on his Facebook page that he had called the White House to complain when that story came out. And a week or two later, when several of the tech industry CEOs met at the White House to talk about some of these issues, Zuckerberg came out afterwards and said he was not satisfied with what the government was proposing to date in terms of reforms. But just to show, I guess in sum, that the relationship is complicated, the tech industry relies on the government's goodwill and good relations on all kinds of policy issues, whether it's immigration reform or patent reform or antitrust oversight or privacy regulation. And at the same time, you have the Obama administration and elected officials in Congress who like to be on friendly terms with the tech industry. They like to have access to the expertise. They like the cool factor of visiting Google or Facebook, and they like to come here and raise money. And as we saw this week, President Obama landed at Moffett Field yesterday and promptly went to a fundraiser where he got a big hug from Marissa Mayer of Yahoo, and so it just shows, I think, that the issue, that brings us to the present, and I think the issue is still complicated. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Can we disagree at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, how about this? I mean, if you have the Obama administration and the government writ large saying, well, you know, you want our help on immigration reform or privacy regulation and or antitrust and all this kind of stuff. I mean, isn't this a little scary? As in maybe drop some of these legal fights to protect your users, and we'll let you do some mergers. I mean, this is not the kind of government that we would generally call a liberal democracy that is tethered to the rule of law.
I'm not sure that I would disagree with you on that. I think that is an issue, and in fact, I think when it goes back to the question of how some of these companies reacted to being approached through legal process, we don't know exactly how all of them responded, and certainly they faced, you know, heavy legal clubs of previous court orders and things like that. But it has been, you know, it's certainly been there been hinted in some reporting, without a lot of evidence, granted, but that, you know, issues of, hey, I'm interested in that, you know, $200 million government contract next year. Those kinds of things have to cross the minds of people who are deciding whether to fight.
Well, that's true with AT&T. I'd be surprised if they probably get double digits in terms of percentage of revenue from the government, but the companies out here don't. I mean, like, how much money does Twitter get from the government? Like none. So it has to be a little different. I mean, than some of the traditional telecommunications providers that get billion-dollar contracts from the feds.
And that may be why you see some of the internet companies more forcefully speaking out on issuing these transparency reports and complaining more loudly than until recently we have heard from some of the telecom companies. I don't know.
Should we try to get some questions from the audience? Maybe bring up the lights so we can see folks. Otherwise, we're just going to have to try to find disagreements that may not actually exist, which will be really depressing.
I have a question and a comment. First, a comment. Actually, Cisco does get significant revenue from the government.
Well, Cisco isn't running lots of data centers with my email either. So I understand they're in a different situation, but we've been pretty much talking about web companies as opposed to hardware infrastructure providers.
Well, but they've also been implicated, you know, by the Snowden revelations about, you know, implied complicity with NSA. So, but I do have a question. So you've been talking a lot about kind of, you know, the big losers, you know, in this, in terms of hits to, you know, the image, reputation, and potentially business of mostly internet companies. Is there any particular, you know, Silicon Valley company that you think has kind of been, you know, lucky, you know, in terms of not being exposed to scrutiny? I mean, LinkedIn springs to mind. You know, there were some revelations about NSA DNS spoofing of LinkedIn sessions with a cryptographer, a professor in Belgium, and some other Belgian nationals. But I haven't heard, you know, their name a lot. Are there others that come to mind that just
Well, I don't
seem
use LinkedIn for my confidential email or personal documents. I don't really care that much about if someone, the NSA looks at my resume.
Well, the
There's-
NSA inserted malware onto their computers that will allow them.
But
to,
that's not unique to LinkedIn. I mean, you can do that with any website as long as you can control enough of the communication channels or maybe subvert certificate authority. I mean, the way I think of it is the companies that were early to adopt encryption by default, both encrypting the connections from the end users, my laptop here, to a data center, and also the in-between data centers have an advantage, and the companies that don't look kind of stupid at best. I mean, Google was the first to adopt forward secrecy. It was the first to turn on, since the day one when Gmail was released over a decade ago, you could always had the option of HTTPS, and that became default years ago. And Yahoo finally enabled in the last 6 months, you could finally turn it on or make it default. So Yahoo has been very, very slow. I mean, even Yahoo IM, this was, you alluded to this, Yahoo Chats, this has been unencrypted since day one. I was reading articles from Frack and hacking publications back in 2002 saying, hey, everything's unencrypted except the login credentials, so you can just eavesdrop on what's going on. And Yahoo has been moving very slowly to change that, as opposed to Gtalk or Hangouts, which are encrypted as well.
Do you think that encryption is really all that valuable with the revelations about RSA collusion and promulgating a crackable algorithm, or just the fact that the NSA announced in 2003, 11 years ago, that they had successfully cracked 2048-bit encryption algorithms, and
well, that's not exact. I mean, there's not even been a publicly documented factoring of a 1024-bit key. Also, so I think I'll challenge that on the facts. Also, I mean, SSL, if properly implemented, protects you. Edward Snowden has said repeatedly, every time someone sticks a microphone in his face, he says encryption done properly will protect you. And there's never been any document hinting at that to the contrary. I mean, you can try to subvert encryption standards, but there are some natural antibodies that have been fighting back against the NSA for over a decade and trying to keep these standards secure. I mean, RSA is not, there are a lot more encryption algorithms in use now than RSA. Look at Adam Langley's blog post on Google's security blog last week for some info.
I would just add, and I'm by far not a technical expert, but one argument that I have heard from experts is that encryption is particularly effective at making it harder for outside agents to do something with mass amounts of data.
Right.
And it
forces
forces them to focus on a specific target, which hopefully is a justifiable target, somebody that needs to be targeted. And just going back to your other question, it's interesting because, again, I've heard from experts suggest that Google has been out front early in using encryption, and that, say, Yahoo, as Declan mentioned, was slower. And yet, in terms of the public relations impact and the tarring, I think to a lot of the average internet users, I'm not sure that they're aware of that, and I think that Yahoo, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, all of these companies provide a variety of services that people use to conduct so much of their lives and their communications, and I think they've all been implicated in the public's mind to some extent.
One final question, and then I'll yield the microphone to anybody. So, do you think the media coverage has increased, the average digital man on the streets knowledge, of how the internet really works, and what they can do to protect themselves and to militate for better protection, whether that's increased legal regulations or better oversight or transparency?
I like to hope so, that it's increased people's awareness and interest in the issue. I think you see members of Congress responding on the issue. You have to assume that they're responding somewhat to their constituencies.
The legal fallout is important. Well, we'll hear from lawyers later, I guess. That's tremendous. These documents. I mean, look. The Supreme Court considered Section 702, which is used in to compel companies to turn over docs for the PRISM database. And last February, Justice Alito said, well, it's a 5-4 decision, and I'm going to write for the majority saying, go away, Amnesty International and journalists challenging this law, because all your complaints are speculative. Well, actually, fast forward 4 months, we've got original docs, and so this is great for lawyers. In terms of the actual man on the street, I don't think so. The internet is a complicated creature that I, as a programmer and journalist, I don't profess to understand completely either. I think it's raised the privacy concerns, and there's some surveys in the last week that show people are, say, searching for sensitive topics less frequently, and these seem compelling. But we're not done yet. Glenn Greenwald and the other folks with access to the Snowden docs at The Intercept and elsewhere keep saying, we've got a lot of docs to go through. There's tens of thousands, perhaps. This is not over yet.
Well, don't feel bad about not understanding the internet. Gartner found in 2000 that at that point the complexity of just an average enterprise network had surpassed the capacity of a human being to understand. So don't feel bad. Okay, so I want to open up the mic for people who might have questions. We have somebody coming up.
Hi, I'm Frédéric Douzet. I'm a professor of geopolitics at the University of Paris 8, so I thought I would bring a European perspective in this. The Snowden revelations definitely were a wake-up call for Europe and the level of dependency on Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on. And I was wondering whether you had covered and followed the debates about the reform of the data protection rule in Europe, because there's been really intense lobbying by those big companies that have clearly slowed down the discussions. But there are some core issues and some values in terms of data protections in Europe that are very important, I think. I wonder to what extent these actions and lobbying hasn't been counterproductive for the image of these big companies. And not that I trust Europe to be able to come up with some kind of internet giant, but at least I wonder whether it hasn't created at least the incentive.
This is a good point. I mean, you know more about this than I do. There's what I would say is that we've been possibly critical of the NSA of the two of us here, but this is even though we're U.S. citizens, it's sitting here in the U.S. and we have the most extensive protections in theory possible. But if you're not a U.S. citizen or you're in Europe, I mean, all bets are off. The NSA is listening to everything that you can do constitutionally, and they may choose not to exercise that power, but they can. So you're in a difficult position. But that said, the European security services do the same thing. Every government spies on everyone else's citizens. We see that the GCHQ in the UK has been, if anything, more aggressive than the NSA in spying. The German, French intelligence agencies will spy on everyone they can get away with. It's just the NSA happens to be a bit better at it. Everyone else might just be a few years behind.
Yeah, well, yes, although we wish we had the budget of the NSA, that's far from being the case.
At $10 billion a year,
there's also that American companies could be forced into cooperating with the U.S. government, which therefore raises big issues in France.
So let's move the servers to the UK, and then they get forced to cooperate with the GCHQ, or let's move it to wherever you put the servers, they're going to be forced to cooperate with that local government at gunpoint. So what do? I mean, maybe you use some sort of parity bit striping, and then you store the data all over the place, and so you need 3 different governments to agree to cooperate, which I think is a good idea. Someone should do this. But seriously, if you split up the data into three parts, and you need all 3 data centers to turn over the information to reconstitute the file, that might be an interesting legal approach.
Right. Well, what you do is precisely what's in the data protection rule reform, meaning getting authorization from the government of your country before you transfer data to your own government if you're a foreign company handling the data of citizens of a European country.
You know more about this than I do, but I mean the data protection rules that I've read years ago. I mean this primarily deals with perhaps law enforcement access and certainly what companies can do with the data exchanging between subsidiaries and other companies, but it generally does not deal with national security. That's kind of like the back door. If you have a German search engine or email provider, that you're going, I mean you're still going to have this wonderful gaping back door that the security services can use for terrorist investigations that the data protection directive doesn't cover.
The U.S. companies they're not really interested in seeing different levels of regulation or oversight. I mean, they deal with this in terms of privacy rules, which in Europe are stronger, and antitrust oversight, and I'm sure they would much rather not have to deal with that more in heightened level of scrutiny or oversight. But I think they also know that they have to respond to the legal regulation where they are.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello there, my name is David Orfros. So I thought of continuing this track on the national security and maybe expand it to the geopolitical arena. I just have the feeling that the US is not going to be sending out very many troops in the future, and that we're moving from sort of hard power to soft power. And we can see it in Ukraine and Russia that the Obama administration is aiming for things like sanctions and stuff like that. And then, of course, it's good to have information about the people you're going to sanction. And of course, it will work the other way too. I imagine that there may be other countries that want to look at things over here. So in this light, I can just imagine if I was Obama, I would think I would put more effort on this kind of stuff we're talking about now if I want to pull down on the troops.
Do you mean put more effort into privacy protections and reining in the NSA, or put more, or spend more money on expanding the NSA's snooping ability?
The latter,
yeah.
because I'm talking sort of the U.S. And the sort of geopolitical game. So I wonder if you can comment a bit on that, because I haven't really seen that angle so much. And of course, we all want privacy and I as much as anybody else. But somehow, if you look historically, people went to submitted to a guy with a big stick if he could protect them against other guys with big sticks.
I think you're right about soft power. I mean, this is. I don't profess to be an expert in this, but it seems like after 13 years of randomly occupying in other countries and nation building, we finally had enough of it. And the libertarian impulse in U.S. politics is not isolationist; it's more neutral. I mean, there's no reason why we have to be the policeman of the West, and the U.S. has been bankrolling the security and stability of the West, and Europe has been free riding on this for a while. And so you see the rise of Rand Paul, who's probably less likely to randomly or nation build than than Republicans would have been a generation ago. That said, I mean, so what you're saying maybe is that the NSA, the broad geopolitical trend is actually to beef up the NSA, and so if it may be too late to try to rein it in, and the best we can do is try to redirect.
Yeah, right. That it's going to be fewer tanks and bombers, and there's going to be more cyber warfare.
Yeah.
And that I can just, I see so little written about it. It would be nice to see people look more at it, because of course I'm wondering which other countries are trying to look into my computer. And how successful are they? We don't know. I don't know enough about the technology to know if the NSA has some kind of unique possibility to look at our stuff. Or, I heard they looked at the German Prime Minister. Maybe the Germans can look at Obama's phone.
The Chinese would certainly like to do that. The Red Army has its offensive cyber operations that have been pretty well documented.
So what does it look like, actually? We're just hearing about the American part. So, and it's not a national issue anymore. It is a global issue.
There's one last point I'll turn over to my colleague. There's it might be possible to try to do some structural changes by changing by removing some of the cyber offensive stuff from the NSA. It doesn't need to be there. It's not written in the heavens that the NSA has to be the center for all of this. And also, I mean, there have been talks for the last decade, ever since the Washington Post ran a series of cyber war stories a decade ago about treaties and trying to say certain things are just beyond the pale, and we will not do this. I don't know. I think this is going to be much harder to police. I mean, look at the difficulties in chemical weapons policing, but maybe that's the way to go. I have no further thoughts.
I think your point is plausible, but this one is a little bit beyond my expertise, so I have no further thoughts either. I'm sorry.
So just to end with one sentence. I already ended it seems. But if you want to do war against the Russians on Ukraine, you might want to do a social network analysis of the Russian leadership and see, which guys are in the bridge position, so you can pick them up, for example. And they would want to do it with us.
Exactly.
Thank you for your talk. It's about an economic crisis that is bringing all these Snowden revelations with high-tech companies. So.
Okay.
So no, what I wanted to say is about an on the crisis, economic crisis.
Yeah, it's.
Well, I can explain.
Please go ahead. I'll repeat if necessary.
Yeah, I can just say. No, what I said is there is a financial crisis, after all these Snowden revelations, and it's bringing not just a problem here, it's an international community problem. And Brazil, for example, I'm actually from Peru, but in Brazil, for example, years ago, I believe they decided don't go or reject to do business with or don't trust companies in American company because their servers are going to be implicated. And actually, it's also because we are talking about Silicon Valley companies, so it's a competitive disadvantage for most of them. And I guess still it is because they couldn't get in China. So, but I mean, there are a lot of different other issues, but this is specifically about Snowden that is bringing the worry. Foreigners are worried to they start getting information. NSA, for example, they want to know better their enemies, so they want to be there. But now, because they are in the eyes of the world, so as a media, I understand that Snowden talk about a part of encryptions and about that the companies has to secure their system, their servers, and they have to be able to catch all these consumers that are leaving America and preferring to start their own servers in their own countries. I don't know how they can do it because I understand that encryption is expensive. I'm not sure because I'm not a technical person whether it is or not. But also Snowden talk about how to solve this issue is about creating a Carta Magna. Something Carta Magna type of the internet. No? That's what he proposed. And as a media person, what do you think? How this international community can feel safe again with American? Thank you. With American companies.
Well, three thoughts. The first is that if American companies are bound to comply with U.S. law, and if the U.S. law is privacy protective, that's great. If it's not privacy protective, and it's not right now, we have some problems. And there are ongoing efforts to try to fix the law. The second is that encryption is actually not very expensive. Google has a bunch of blog posts up that said that turning on SSL increased their cost by 2 or 3%, and this was about 2 years ago. And so that, I mean, now it's probably closer to 1%.
Maybe in other countries it's expensive, or it will be the same.
I'm talking about link layer encryption at the cost of to servers. If you're trying to do things like manual encrypting each email, I mean it's PGP, it's painful, it's time consuming, but if done properly, it doesn't have to be expensive in terms of computing costs. And the third is that in terms of Brazil, and I remember going to meetings at the UN in New York a decade ago and watching Brazil representatives denounce the US-controlled internet and forming an ad hoc alliance with China at IGF meetings. And Paul from the Internet Society, who goes to more of these than I do, probably knows knows more. But I mean, put it in the geopolitical spectrum. I mean, Brazil has been fighting back about perceived U.S. internet control for long before anyone ever heard of Edward Snowden. This is just a convenient data point.
Well, and I think we had discussion of legislation in Brazil just post-Snowden about requiring all data to be stored within the country and somehow attempting to restrict companies from moving Brazilians' data outside of Brazil. I believe that legislation faltered because it raised all kinds of technical issues that, again, I think the industry and technical experts will argue that you really can't have an effective internet if you start legislating requirements that you can't move data across national
to keep their
borders.
servers in Brazil, but not just also for legislation reasons, but also because of the security, I guess, for of their own country. And so, what do you think about the media is thinking about the new type of regulation that he's proposing, that everybody has to have a unique internet constitution, or something like that, like a kind of Carta Magna, as he said. What do you think about it?
I'm not sure I have a personal opinion. I'm not
come
sure.
on, you're a journalist. You always have personal opinions.
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that people in the United States are historically resistant to being, I think, subject to some kind of international standard of that sort, as are people in other countries. I don't know.
It's going to take. I mean, I sense that you're talking about some of the internet governance disputes in the last half year, and I haven't followed this closely enough to have a good opinion. My sense is that it's going to take quite a while to play out. The UN has a lot of problems. The ITU has not been a friend to the internet. The ITU is a UN agency. On the other hand, ICANN, our current structure, has lots of problems. It has very few checks and balances, and it's raising hundreds of millions of dollars a year in funding for what should be an administrative function of just making sure that the numbers in terms of IP address blocks are assigned properly. So there are problems with both approaches. I don't know what's going to happen in the end.
Okay, thank you. Another thing is about the companies, for example, Yahoo, Google, and Skype, Facebook, all those big companies. After, I believe, March 2000 this year, after the last revelations, also were mentioned these companies that were in connection with NSA to apparently to work in the PRISM program related to collection of data for different consumers, and apparently they denied. So they denied that they don't want to, because after they get exposure in a list of names of companies and dates that they will start apparently collecting this information. They, after this revelation, they deny that they didn't pursue to go through this, to help the NSA to do this. No? Apparently they deny that they don't want NSLs without a prior judicial or due process. No? If they don't follow the due process, they won't give any information to NSA, they won't collaborate. However, other companies, I understand that they feel that there can be a threshold, can be going against the national security policies, no? So don't commingle or don't go with to help them. So what do you think now after all this is apparently nothing happened, no companies were involved in this type of data collection related to PRISM program. What do you think is happening? What do you think is NSA thinking how they are going to collect their data now?
If you're talking by March, you might be referring to the NSA's General Counsel. They're speaking about PRISM, saying, "Oh yeah, they were aware of this," which was essentially a lie, and there's designed to just move some of the attention from the NSA out here. Be very skeptical of articles you read about PRISM. A lot of journalists, present company accepted, do not know what they're talking about, and they have no technical understanding or legal understanding, and they're merely reprinting what they see elsewhere. The Guardian actually had to change its headline after the article that in March.
Actually, yeah, that's actually Snowden in TED talk. He actually exposed PowerPoints with this information that these companies apparently were in the, it was planned to give or collect this information in combination or in conjunction with NSA. So that's what I was kind of like wanted to know whether it was true that those companies were enlisted or no. The information that he provided apparently was private, secret information, you know, so kind of.
There's no evidence of any company collaborating with the NSA outside of AT&T, Verizon. If you actually look at some of the documents last July, they refer to AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint as our trusted partners and our close relationship. And the opposite with Silicon Valley companies. I stipulate that if some of these companies were getting 50% of their revenues from the feds, they might be, and they go out with a relationship going back decades, it might be different, but it's not.
No, obviously, but that's why they denied, because they were exposure. So they needed to say, no, we are not collaborating, we were not collecting data, because they are in the media, you know, everybody around the world was looking at the media, what Snowden was saying. So there is no evidence, as you said, and that's true, they deny it.
There's no evidence that any Silicon Valley company has collaborated with the NSA, and ample evidence refuting that proposition.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
I was just going to add, the companies have said that they, you know, that their line has been that they only comply with legal requests through a legal process. We haven't had a lot of insight into what goes on when those legal requests come in and how much pushback there is, although the companies have said that they generally, most of the major internet companies have said that they push back vigorously and that sort of thing. If anything, I think with the heightened reporting and awareness of this, that puts more pressure on those companies to push back vigorously. And we're starting to see a couple of indications of that. Yahoo and Google started talking about this last year, that, for example, when they receive a request, a legal demand that they would, or a subpoena, that they're starting to notify the user that the government has made a legal demand for that user's data. Other companies say that they're starting to do that too, which has the effect of maybe making it a little less easy for the government to come in with that request, because they may not want to tip off the user.
But keep in mind, they're not requests. These are compulsory process. This is the feds show up to bust your door down at 4 a.m. on a trumped-up drug charge. They don't request to serve a search warrant. You're on the floor hogtied while they serve that search warrant. Yeah, and that's the same thing that happens with these companies.
Yeah, I actually try to make a point of using the word demand when I write these articles, but it's easy to slip into that terminology.
Still is explaining they are trying to justify themselves, saying that, like, we need to know before the person commit a murder. We need to find out before the murder commit a murder. We need to find out more about the person and the background, and they need to investigate and collect all this data before the person commit a crime. So that's what apparently they are justifying the use of this data collection from a lot of people.
But let me rise to the defense of surveillance for a moment. I've been critical of the NSA earlier, but let's say that it's not a suspicion of someone might be a murderer at some point. I mean, I guess anyone can in theory murder someone, even if you're just driving your car home and someone runs in front of you. That there's actually a convicted murderer who's on the loose, and he just murdered someone else. This guy's guilty, we know it, and we want to find out who he's talking to, and so that might mean accessing his email, that might mean accessing his Facebook page with compulsory legal process. But this is no different from a search warrant that has been around in English common law and in the U.S. legal system for hundreds of years. So it's just and so if there's a murderer on the loose, we want to access his accounts if we can to prevent him from striking again. So at some point you need to be able to access. The question is what rules apply.
you do want due process for them to access those accounts.
Absolutely.
Because he's an accused murderer.
Well, no, he's convicted, and we have him on video murdering again. Don't argue with the hypothetical here.
It's always about reasonable expectation of privacy. They can do anything or probable cause. I guess most of the problem is like going in that direction. They just justify their actions through that path and probable cause, and they just have suspicions of something is going to happen, so they have to collect it. But I guess everything is going through a good legal direction nowadays, more than before, and it's good. It's good
And I
that
think
the media and everybody is standing up for. International community also is involved now, so it's kind of hard to don't let them follow the law.
And I was just going to add, I think the web service, I don't think this is by any means resolved, but I think there is some more pressure on the web service providers to be more, to examine those demands more closely when they're deciding how they're going to comply.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering, looking with the profession, because there's also been an explosion of attention on the subject by the media where there was not before, despite the fact that we've been knowing this occurs and has been legislated upon and allowed to occur, but yet I'm just wondering, if you could give us insight about your assessment of yourselves as journalists, and the response of these influential players in discussing these matters. Are they more open, more collaborative, or less so, and when? And does that have anything to do with that? Or we're just journalists not paying a whole lot of attention or inquiring in a critical manner to bring this message to the public? Viewing the journalist profession as a cultural production and having a social responsibility to inform the public on things to be thinking or inquiring about.
Well, let me tell you a WikiLeaks story. I've known Julian Assange since the 1990s when he argued on the cypherpunks list. There's created by Bay Area folks. There's WikiLeaks originally was trying to get attention for documents by posting them in raw form on its website. And that didn't really work because it was like, well, this is this document. Who wants to read through a 100-page document describing all these government misdeeds? It's just too much work. So what they did was they moved to a different model, which was cooperation with journalists. And sometimes it backfired, like it did with both the New York Times and the Guardian. But what it did was get these leaked documents pre-Snowden to appear in reputable news organizations, so then other journalists would follow it. And journalism is, to some extent, a sort of a pack profession. The journalists travel in packs, metaphorically, and the New York Times, and to a lesser extent the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, set the tone for what's the story of the day. What Glenn Greenwald did was to make sure that instead of just posting the documents on greenwald.com, which he could have done, and maybe some blog posts there, it appeared in the Guardian, it appeared in the Washington Post, it later appeared in the New York Times. And so then it injected these stories into the mainstream media narrative, and other journalists would follow it, as opposed to, well, it's just some blog post by some ex-litigator, and we can safely be ignored. So it was a brilliant way to make people start talking about it and other journalists to follow.
And it's easier to report on something like this when you do have a stack of documents and internal slides and that sort of thing, as opposed to one lone whistleblower or source or something like that. That's certainly true. I mean, so as a result, we're having a lot more reporting and public discussion this year than over the last year than in previous years. There's no doubt.
I think our time here has come to an end.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, class is over. But thanks very much. It was a very interesting discussion. And Declan, I'll send you my source for that.
Please do.
2040 at Kraken. So we're going to break for lunch. Again, it's just right outside on the lawn in front of the theater. And come back for our next session at 1:35. Thanks very much.